And welcome to the Thursday edition of the Morning Pit here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You know that website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You found it all at Panther-Lair.com, and of course message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans, talking to other Pitt fans all day, every day about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports, whether it's football, basketball, recruiting, other sports outside of the football and basketball world, and we cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And we have this YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you subscribe to that. It's like our video extension of the website. Do a lot of things here, whether it's the Pat Narduzzi Thursday press conference, which we'll have later today, whether it's our Panther-Lair show like we did last night, our post-game show like we do on Saturdays after the game, or these morning Pitt videos that we do Monday through Friday every day. Just give you something to think about, something to talk about for the day. Good conversation starter yesterday, in case you missed it. We were talking about the super seniors, those scholarship players who could come back for one more year, scholarship seniors who have one more year of eligibility due to that COVID extra year that the NCAA granted a couple years ago. We talked about those guys. Pitt has 20 of them. Who could come back? Who should come back? Who would Pitt want to have back? We tried to answer all of those questions and went player by player through all 20. So if you missed that, make sure you check it out right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like I said, click the subscribe button, click the like button. I think it's down there somewhere. I can't really see it from my perspective, but I'm sure you see it. It's like a little thumbs up, like, click that. We really appreciate it. Make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. 2 days away from this road trip to Virginia. Pitt's at Virginia on Saturday, first of the final three games, final quarter of the season. And, tomorrow we'll talk more sort of specifically about Virginia, and we'll look around the Coastal at the other games going on this weekend. But the more I look at these final three games, the more I find myself I find my thoughts drifting out to the idea of Pitt maybe winning at least two, if not all three. And probably, the headline of this video, can Pitt win out? I mean, that's sort of a quick question to grab your attention, but I mean, there is a real question to be had there. I mean, and granted, we're having this conversation in the aftermath of a win, right? Pitt beat Syracuse on Saturday. They beat a ranked team, came to Acrisure Stadium, a game that probably a lot of Pitt fans maybe thought they wouldn't win. I thought they had a decent chance because I wasn't entirely sold on Syracuse, particularly if they didn't have their quarterback, Garrett Schrader, which was the case. But I think what we saw in that game is sort of a blueprint of how Pitt can win. And we talked about this earlier in the week of whether or not Pitt can win this way, playing good defense and just running the ball. If, we get to the final third of the season and this is just who they are, that they've shown us who they are, they've shown us what they do, they've shown us what they're good at, and, just as important, they've shown us what they're not good at. And so you have this question of, how much can Pitt win playing that way? Can Pitt win playing that way? And is it sustainable? And I think, I kind of said this as we talked about the Syracuse game in particular, that, it's still a one-score game pretty late in the action there. And while Pitt ends up winning by 10 points on the strength of a safety, that game was still, one defensive mistake away from being potentially a tie game. And then we're probably talking about it very differently because the defense had to play virtually a perfect game against Syracuse in order to make that plan work. I don't think there's anyone who would say that they can get by in these final three games scoring 19 points. Even if Virginia's offense isn't very good, and even if Miami's offense isn't very good, and make no mistake, they've both been bad this season. They've been bad overall, and they've been even worse in conference games so far. I was looking at the scoring totals just in conference games. These are two of the bottom three offenses in the league. Virginia's averaging 18.3 points per game. Miami is dead last in the conference. It's 16.4 points per game in conference games. Miami's played 5 ACC games and they've scored 8 touchdowns. Even Pitt has scored 15 touchdowns in 5 ACC games. Even Pitt is averaging, close to 24 points per game, which no one's going to write home about that. Nobody's going to say, wow, that's a potent offense. But you're talking about a difference of, 7-8 points per game above what Miami's doing, 5 or so points per game above what Virginia's been averaging in conference games. So while we talk about Pitt's offense being so poor, Miami and Virginia really are bringing up the rear in the ACC right now. And so these are potentially offenses that Pitt, should have a realistic chance at outscoring, particularly when you throw in the fact that Virginia's given up almost 25 points per game in conference games. Miami's closer to 30, 28.6 points per game allowed in conference games this season. So you have two teams that are not playing very good offense right now, haven't been playing very good offense basically all season, certainly haven't been playing very good offense in the ACC, and, have defenses that maybe can be beat. Defenses that maybe you can get over on. And to some extent, that was sort of the case with Syracuse. I think Syracuse's defense looked better than what you see out of Miami or Virginia. I think Miami and Virginia, in some stats are behind where Syracuse was, and so I think you expected a tougher defensive challenge out of Syracuse. Ultimately you scored 19 points, so Syracuse did something right on defense. But I don't think their offense was anything that scared you all that much. The reliance on Sean Tucker, the reliance on Garrett Schrader running, I don't think their offense scared you all that much. So it's a little bit like those games, looking at Miami and Virginia, just without the early season success that Syracuse had. Miami and Virginia have been struggling all season. Syracuse got off to a hot start. They start 5-0, 6-0, something like that. And so if anything, these might be even better opportunities for wins in these two road games, the at Virginia game this Saturday, the at Miami game in 2 weeks, and the regular season finale. And yes, we know Pitt has only won at Miami once since 1963. That was in 2014 in the finale against a Miami team that underachieved and pretty much had quit and given up by that point in the season. That might be an interesting kind of similarity to draw. But I think when you look at these games, and obviously we're sort of dancing around that game in the middle, the home finale against Duke. Duke is going to be, as it looks right now, the biggest challenge out of the three. As it looks right now, Duke has been the most successful out of those teams. They're 6-3 overall. They've played a pretty good season so far. They got as close to knocking off North Carolina as anybody since Appalachian State. They've gotten as close to knocking off North Carolina as anybody in the ACC has. The interesting thing about Duke is when you look at statistically what they're doing in conference games, they are running the ball a lot and running it really, really well. There's only 4 teams in the ACC that have rushed for more than 1,000 yards in conference games this season. Duke is one of them. They've got 1,100 yards. They're averaging 223.8 rushing yards per game in ACC games this season. And they're actually defending the run pretty well, too. They're second in the ACC in run defense in conference games, whereas Pitt's third, right behind them. We'll talk about Duke in a second, but Virginia and Miami look like they're there for the taking. There's a couple of keys. There's a couple of ways, a couple of things Pitt has to do to avoid blowing those opportunities. I talked earlier in the week about who this team is, and it's pretty clear who they are, and it's pretty clear what they do, and it's pretty clear what they're able to do. And I've sort of given up hope on this passing game just clicking out of nowhere, and all of a sudden it's going to be really good, and they're gonna, it's just all going to come together. I've sort of given up hope given up hope for that happening. Although we talk about Duke, their pass defense they're giving up the most passing yards in conference games of anybody in the ACC this year, so maybe there's something to be had there. But I've given up hope on sort of everything coming together there. What I've been looking at is what this team has done, what they can do well, and where they need to, what they need to avoid in these final 3 games. And this is, easy, overly simplistic football logic, but turnovers. Turnovers, and we'll get even more specific than that, but Pitt has 14 offensive turnovers this season. They have one other on a special teams fumble on a punt against Western Michigan, a punt return. But on offense, they've turned the ball over 14 times. That's a lot for 9 games. You don't want to average more than 1 turnover per game. 1.5 turnovers or whatever it ends up being. You don't want to average that, but it's even worse, though. Because of those 14 offensive turnovers, 9 have happened in the opponent's on the opponent's side of the 50. And they actually had 1 at the 50. So you really could say 10 happened at the 50 going in. 10 out of 14 turnovers. And, it's bad if you turn the ball over on your own side of the field because that gives the opposing team good field position. And so you don't want to turn it over anywhere. But what Pitt has been doing is with an offense that is struggling, an offense that has struggled to put up points all season, they're shooting themselves in the foot by taking away some of their scoring chances. They have had 7 offensive turnovers inside the opponent's 35. Think about that. Driving inside the 35, and 7 times they have wasted those possessions, got no points out of it because they turned the ball over. 7 times inside the 35. And 4 out of those 7 were in the Tennessee and Louisville games. Both losses. Tennessee, it happened 3 times inside the 35, and actually it was even closer. Louisville, it happened 3 times. It was, they had 2 interceptions at the 2 and a fumble at the 18. Well, 3 times they drove inside. Actually, they were inside the 30 on all 3 of those possessions. They drove inside the 30 and turned the ball over in a game that they end up losing 24-10, with one of Louisville's touchdowns coming on a scoop and score. But you look offense to offense, it was a 17-10 game, and you had 3 times that you drove inside the 30 and came away with 0 points due to turnovers. I mean, even if you assume obviously the worst case scenario is the turnovers, but if you assume the worst possible points out of the situation, you get 3 field goals. Now at least offense to offense, you're up 19-17. And if you get a touchdown somewhere in there, you're going to start pushing into the 20s against a team that only scored 17 offensive points against you. That's the game right there. Tennessee's the same way. The interception in the end zone, which, pretty clearly was a pass thrown because Keaton Slovis saw the flag that had been thrown out there. So he took a shot into the end zone. The ball gets flukily tipped off of Bub Means' hands and ends up in Tennessee's hands. They pick up a flag for defensive holding or something. And the ball goes to Tennessee. I mean, that's at least 3 points from where they were. They were at the Tennessee 21 for that play. That's at least 3 points, if not, a touchdown in a game that ends up going to overtime. That's the difference. That's the difference right there. Those 4 turnovers inside the opponent's 35. Those 4 turnovers are the difference between Pitt being 5-4 right now and being 7-2 with a win over, a team that's one of the top teams in the country. That's the difference. And if they want to win 2 or 3 of these final 3 games, if they want to win out, you cannot have turnovers in the opponent's territory. And they've done it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in 6 games this season. No. How many times have they done it this season? They've done it. They did it against Tennessee. They had a turnover at the Georgia Tech 40. They had a fumble at the West Virginia 32. They had, obviously, all the turnovers against Louisville, and they had 2 inside the 35 against Syracuse. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games out of 9, they've turned the ball over in their opponent's territory for 10 total turnovers on the 50 going in. You can't make mistakes in those situations. And some of them were interceptions, some of them were fumbles. It's a combination. They were able to get away with it against Syracuse. They have the 2 interceptions, thrown, one interception thrown by Jared Wayne, a bad decision to even call that trick play at that point. And then the other one, the Keaton Slovis sort of heave, where I guess he told Pat Narduzzi he was trying to throw it away. You can't make those mistakes. You're working with a very slim margin right now. And you can't turn the ball over in your opponent's territory, certainly not inside the opponent's 35, and expect to get away with it and expect to win games. When you can't score very much. And so when you look at these 3 games, running, playing good defense, and protecting the football. Now, as it comes to the passing game, because at some point you're going to have to make plays in the passing game. They made a few plays in the passing game against Syracuse. A couple 20-yard passes to Jared Wayne, the 23-yard pass that went down to the 1-yard line. Sebo Flemister cashed that in 2 plays later. They made a couple 29-yard screen to Kanate Mumfield. Even though that was, I think, wasted on the next play with the trick play. You're going to have to make a few passing plays, all right? And at this point, I think you have to boil it down, and you go with the guys that you rely on. And it's Jared Wayne, it's Kanate Mumfield. Last 2 games, Jared Wayne, 20 targets, 13 receptions, 263 yards. Kanate Mumfield, 11 targets, 10 receptions, 81 yards. Those are the guys you've been peppering with targets, 31 passes to those guys over the last 2 games, 23 receptions on those 31 passes. a drop or two in there from Jared Wayne. You have to keep going to those guys. You have to keep throwing to those guys, and those are going to be your main targets in the passing game. I continue to advocate for Gavin Bartholomew. Alberto has seen 4 targets in the last 2 games, and he has 1 reception for 4 yards. You need to scheme the ball to him. You need to draw up plays and run plays that are specifically intended to get the ball to Gavin Bartholomew. Okay? Because he is a weapon. He is someone you can use. He is someone who can make plays with the ball in his hands. He is someone who can catch the ball. He is someone you should go to regularly. And the fact that they haven't, it's still mind-boggling to me. The fact this hasn't been rectified. The fact that he's got 3 games all season where he's seen more than 3 targets in a single game. 9 games. And 6 out of those 9, he's seen 3 or fewer targets. 5 out of those 9, he's seen 2 or fewer targets. That's just wasting talent on your roster. I'd love to see them get Bub Meads involved downfield. I'd love to see them get Jalen Barton involved downfield. I'd love to see them do this, and I'd love to see them do that. Like right now, you got to hone in on your main guys, and it's Israel Abanikanda, and it's Rodney Hammond, and it's Jared Wayne, and it's Kanate Mumfield, and it's Gavin Bartholomew. Those are the 5 guys who need to touch the ball. And if you emphasize those players, if you emphasize getting the ball to them, and you emphasize running the ball, which you should be able to do against these teams you are facing, you're going to have a chance to win. If you avoid turning the ball over in opponent territory, you're going to have a chance to win. I know that last part's kind of obvious, but it's been a real problem for this team. And of their 4 losses, the only time they didn't turn the ball over in opponent territory was the North Carolina game, and they had a fumble at the Pitt 49. So they were pretty close to opponent territory, because against Georgia Tech, they had a fumble at the Georgia Tech 40. Vincent Davis fumbled there. So all 4 of their losses, they've turned the ball over in opponent territory. Oh, pretty close to opponent territory. Midfield or in. You have to avoid that. You don't have room for those kinds of mistakes. You don't have room to make those kinds of errors. You can't take bad penalties. You can't turn the ball over in opponent territory. You're not good enough to overcome them, but you are good enough to beat these teams. You're good enough to beat Virginia. You're good enough to beat Miami. And while Duke has been impressive, they've gotten a lot of their success off the run. And I like Pitt's chances against a team that wants to emphasize the run. Now, Duke will come out and Riley Leonard will throw for 350 yards because that's just, I think Duke has a pretty good coaching staff in place right now, and they'll find ways to exploit Pitt's weaknesses on defense. But it's a real possibility. You don't have North Carolina in this final stretch. Obviously, you don't have Tennessee or something like that in this final stretch. These are beatable teams. These are winnable games. Pitt needs to just get down to sort of basics. Don't run trick plays and things like that. Just basics. You run the ball. You complete passes to your top 3 targets, your guys who are reliable, who can make plays, who can catch the ball. And then you protect the ball. You don't turn it over in opponent territory, and you stop the run on defense. You know what I mean? You play good run defense. Particularly Miami, if they don't have Tyler Van Dyke back, you really just have to not let them get going on the ground against you, which they haven't really done all season. They haven't really been able to get going on the ground at all this year, and I don't think Virginia is really going to have much success in that regard either. These are games, particularly the Miami and Virginia games, these are games that Pitt should win if they don't shoot themselves in the foot. I don't necessarily see them getting outplayed the way they were at North Carolina. Duke could be a possibility. I don't see them getting outplayed, though, against Virginia and Miami the way they were against North Carolina. I see them blowing it themselves like they did against Georgia Tech and Louisville. Tennessee to some extent, too, to be quite frank. They've gotten outplayed, I would say, once this season, and that was the North Carolina game. I mean, Tennessee, they take them to overtime with missed field goals and, a turnover, from the 21. Georgia Tech, Louisville, those teams took advantage of Pitt's mistakes and errors. And I mean, you're going to win games that way for sure. You don't take anything away from the team that won that game. You don't want to say that they were the better team that day, but Pitt should have won those games. And you don't often have a team that sort of, at times, sort of feels like it limped through its first 9 games. They all of a sudden turn it on in the final 3. no matter how much potential you see there. But I think this team still has the potential to make a real go of it here in these final 3 games and maybe string together a couple wins. I think they're capable of it. They just have to stay out of their own way, get down to the basics, and be sort of just focused on fundamental basic stuff. And if they do that, I think they should at the very least beat Virginia this weekend and then go from there. All right, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like this video. We appreciate that very much. And check out Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. Find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, message boards where you can talk to other Pitt fans. Other Pitt fans are talking about, hey, can Pitt win out here? And some are saying yes, and a lot are probably saying no. But you can get your opinion heard there as well. So thanks again for checking this video out. Like I say, make sure you like and subscribe. We'll be back with one final morning Pitt of the week tomorrow morning. So hope you have a great Thursday, and we will talk to you on Friday for the morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.